Hello everyone, my name is Rolf Trundle and I welcome you to this Change Cockpit deep dive all about multi-tenant. First of all, we will go through scope and definition regarding multi-tenant topics, then scenarios where you could use and when you could use multi-tenant in Microsoft 365. Then the building blocks which are needed for a multi-tenant configuration, what features we can gain out of such a configuration, the requirements of it, like licensing requirements, then of a demonstration of the configuration and demonstration of the particular configuration items. And then we will switch from the multi-tenant of the collaboration part in Microsoft 365 to Defender multi-tenant, including a quick demonstration. Then just some small notes about roadmap. It wouldn't be a change cockpit deep dive if there wouldn't be a roadmap. And Q&A. Q&A is only in the live session, but regarding this, just drop me a line if you have any questions about this. First of all, scope. This presentation is about multi-tenant organization with Teams, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Outlook, and so on. So with the collaboration in Microsoft 365. It's about multi-tenant organization with regarding management in Defender Portal. And it is not about multi-tenant applications if you are interested as a developer, and it is not about multi-tenant in all other Azure topics. First of all, let's do a quick recap about definition of a tenant in Microsoft 365. First of all, it's identity and access management. This means a tenant is managed by an Entra ID, by Entra ID itself, formerly Azure AD, and this controls user authentication permission for accessing your Microsoft 365 services like your Word, Excel, Teams, SharePoint Online. It is isolated. A tenant acts as a security, a secure boundary, and it isolates an organization's data. Basically, it's your .on Microsoft.com domain name. That's your tenant, or that's your piece of the Microsoft 365 cake, which is isolated and no one else can see inside this part of or if in your environment. Each tenant can or has its custom configurations, its independent policies, applications, and so on. And there are or can be guest users. That's quite an important topic regarding multi-tenant organization. There can be guest users inside a tenant. A tenant can allow guest users via Entra ID business to business, meaning we can allow other users from other tenants to collaborate and inside our tenant and extending access. So we can grant users from other tenants access to our tenant, and this is done by using guest users. And just as a side note, I know it's out of scope basically, but for developers, a tenant plays a very important role regarding the application model, because an Entra ID application can be either a single tenant application, which is limited to a specific tenant, or a multi-tenant application, which can be used by users from different tenants and for broader distribution and scaling. So why could we use, or when could we use a multi-tenant? What multi-tenant scenarios exists? First, we have some conglomerates. This means we have multiple subsidiaries or business units which operate independently but are still under the hood of the same company, or through mergers and acquisitions. So let's say Contoso buys Fabricam, and we don't want to migrate to a tenant-to-tenant migration, but we want to let them work together more closely. Then these organizations that merge will be closer together using a multi-tenant organization or multi-tenant configuration. Perhaps we have very complex compliance or regulatory needs. Therefore, we need to have tenants in different areas of the world. Let's say we have one which needs to reside in Australia, and we have one which is in Europe. And perhaps we have even such compliance or regulatory needs where multi-geo inside one Microsoft 365 tenant isn't good enough. Then we have multiple geographical boundaries. Let's say we have these orgs that operate in multiple locations, also again with some various residency regulations. But be aware, different areas or different tenant environments like a DoD tenant or a government tenant in the US cannot do a multi-tenant organization with a normal commercial tenant. This will be noted in a later slide as well. Or you have test or staging tenants which you want to some kind of merge or have work, especially with the Defender multi-tenant configuration, so you can see all alerts through all your environments at once. These are some possible scenarios. You can also name your own yourself, but I think the most I see out in the field is mergers and acquisitions. If you buy or your company buys another one, then we can do multi-tenant organization. Then we have some building blocks which are needed to create a multi-tenant organization. First of all, we have the cross-tenant access settings. The cross-tenant access settings are better known when shared channels were released. Then we need, or to leverage shared channels inside Teams, we need to configure cross-tenant access settings between tenants. All these building blocks can be configured independently from the whole multi-tenant organization configuration. That's quite important to know. And they also serve other purposes outside of the multi-tenant organization configuration. So let's say, as I would like to configure trust between two tenants to use shared channels, then I configure this using cross-tenant access settings. And I think the only case at the moment to use this B2B collaboration or this B2B direct connect configuration is currently shared channels. So it's as what I also see out in the field, it's not that widely used because of these extra steps needed in the configuration. So we have the cross-tenant access settings. These are trust settings. If you know Active Directory from on-premises, perhaps you know you could create forest trusts. You can trust two individual Active Directory. So that's some kind of a trust like from Active Directory. It's called cross-tenant access settings, where you can link two tenants together to a trust relationship. It manages how your tenant allows or disallows the access to your tenant or from the other tenant to your tenant. So we see here users home entra tenant. It has our outbound access settings. We can allow or block internal users, apps, and or only specific users, groups and apps to access the resource tenant in this example, and the resource tenant then needs the inbound access setting. So we need always two sides of the configuration. We need the outbound part of the user who wants to access the resources in the other tenant, and then in this tenant we need the inbound part, and vice versa if we want to work together. So the resource tenant then needs the inbound access settings and also needs to configure the allowance or allow or block for user access, app access, and so on. And we on an internal and inbound access settings, we can also configure trust settings. We can trust the MFA claim from, in this case, the user's home Microsoft Entra tenant. So if the user already did MFA inside this tenant, we can still trust this, so this user doesn't have to do another MFA prompt or satisfy another MFA claim again when accessing resources from this destination tenant. Also for compliant devices, if it's compliant in the user's home tenant, we can trust this. But we can do that. We don't have to configure this trust so deeply. And also the third one is the enter hybrid joint device claim, and that's in conjunction with conditional access. So that's the first part, cross-tenant access settings. But we don't, for multi-tenant organization, we can, but we don't have to configure this by ourselves. It can be done using the multi-tenant organization configuration wizard, as we will see in the demo afterwards. Then the next building blocks, or the next two topics, are B2B Direct Connect. As mentioned before, the B2B Direct Connect part, using cross-tenant access settings, we establish a mutual and two-way trust with the other tenant. And the most important, or we distinguish the direct connect between the B2B collaboration part. In the B2B direct connect scenarios, the users are not represented in the other directory. So the user stays inside its own directory, and we don't do like we do a guest user when we do an invite using B2B collaboration. So B2B Direct Connect, as mentioned before, it's only used currently for Teams Connect shared channels. And we can also do B2B collaboration. That's widely used. For example, if you invite an external user to your team's team, and then this user will get an invitation, that's then a B2B collaboration guest user inside your Entra ID, which will be then created during this invitation. And this user is therefore represented in your Entra ID as a guest user. And for MTO, multi-tenant organization, we use B2B collaboration as foundation, but not guest. We will use memory use, but more on that later. So that's quite important to know. We will see all other users from the other tenants when we configure multi-tenant organization inside our tenant. This will be done, or we will see these users, as just mentioned, because we will do a cross-tenant synchronization. That's the next building block for multi-tenant organization. When setting up cross-tenant synchronization, as mentioned before, also this part can be done individually and also without configuring multi-tenant organization. Let's say you decide you want to synchronize your users with your partner's tenants users, then you can just go in, enter ID, and configure cross-tenant synchronization without configuring multi-tenant on top of it. But anyway, this is needed, and this will also be automatically configured for you if you don't want to do it yourself. Also more on that in the demonstration part. So the cross-tenant synchronization is a synchronization engine which will synchronize your users or part of your users from your source tenant in the target tenant. And this can also be more than one source tenant into one target tenant. And in this target tenant, these users will be represented as collaboration, B2B collaboration users. These are external user members. These guest accounts don't have any password inside the target tenant. The password is still maintained in the Entra ID from the source tenant. It's just some kind of a link between the source and the target tenant, so that the target tenant users can see and use this user as well in their own tenant. This will be done by cross-tenant synchronization. And by default, if you do a cross-tenant synchronization, the users here will be created as B2B guest users. Then multi-tenant, or another building block for multi-tenant organization is the feature of multi-tenant people search. When you do, or when you that's only possible if you do a multi-tenant organization configuration. This can't be done individually. It's just a feature, a part of multi-tenant organization configuration. this is the multi-tenant people search. So if you configure multi-tenant organization, then these B2B collaboration users will be visible in your Outlook, for example, in your global address list. Then these users will be elevated to the user type of member. We need to be very exact here because we need to distinguish between B2B guest users and B2B member users. By default, if you invite someone into your teams, then you will have a B2B guest user. That's an external user which doesn't have or who doesn't have the same permissions and rights as a B2B member user. If you convert, you can also do this manually if you would like to do so. If you convert a B2B collaboration users from guest to member, then Entra ID will treat these users as an internal users, and such a user will also get the same permissions as a normal member users in your organization. So if you elevate the member users, the guest users to member users, then these users will be available to work with and to collaborate with in the most Microsoft 365 applications. Then showing address list need to be set to true for the global address list, and the user type needs to be member instead of guest. So it will work, but that's more a technical detail because this will also be done for you by default in the out-of-the-box configuration when configuring the multi-tenant organization. So we need the foundation of the cross-tenant access settings and the B2B collaboration part, and we need the cross-tenant synchronization. Actually, no, we can use cross-tenant synchronization. You can also use your own synchronization tools. And then we can, on top of this, we will be able to configure the multi-tenant organization, which will then release or which will get you features on top of all the other things which you wouldn't get without this multi-tenant organization configuration. First of all, how to create? You create this multi-tenant organization configuration as using an invite and accept flow in Microsoft 365 Admin Center. This organization, multi-tenant organization, is a boundary around the Microsoft Entra tenant. So you will join multiple tenants up to 100, actually, up to 100 tenants. You will join to one multi-tenant organization. So it's some kind of a virtual organization where you glue these tenants together using synchronization of users and cross-tenant access settings. And in these examples, we have 3 tenants. We can always have one, or we must have always one owner tenant. That's the tenant C in this example. And then you can have, or you will have one or more member tenants. You need at least one member tenant to form a multi-tenant organization. And then this will enable seamless collaboration experiences in Teams, but also in Microsoft 365 applications like Viva Engage, or you can share your files directly to these users in SharePoint Online, as an example. Then, from these building blocks for the multi-tenant organizations, when you create this configuration of a multi-tenant organization, all your existing B2B collaboration members, so let's say you have your teams already for the mergers and acquisition teams, and you already invited some external users, some users from the other tenant to these teams, then this will be represented as B2B guest users, and these B2B guest users already have access inside these teams. So these B2B collaboration members will then be converted, if you like to do so. It's not by default, but you should do so, to B2B collaboration members instead of guests, and then they will become multi-tenant organization members as soon as you do the multi-tenant organization creation. So they will get a level up or some more features the multi-tenant organization experiences. This unlocks improved Teams collaboration, and this needs the reciprocal provision of B2B collab member users. As mentioned before, if you already have set up the synchronization by third-party tools or whatever you would like to use, but you can also just use cross-tenant synchronization by Enter ID, and then Enter ID will do the synchronization of these users to you. But it's very important and it's a must-have for a multi-tenant organization to work, that these users will be synchronized somehow between the tenants. And this will also, you unlock then SharePoint Online on OneDrive for Business sharing to business members if you use people in company link type. So if you go to share a file or share a folder, then you have the link type people in Contoso. And if you do so, then all users from, let's say, Change Cockpit in this example, which is in the same multi-tenant organization, will also have access to this link because they now count to the same organization. Supported workloads in a multi-tenant organizations are Teams, especially for chat, but also Teams for meetings, or you will get access to Copilot in the destination tenant. You will have access to member-only features in there. You will go through the lobby. If the lobby settings are only for people in your org, go directly through the lobby inside to the meeting. All others stay in the lobby, but your multi-tenant organization users will then be thread-like. They are member users or regular users. Viva Engage will also has some multi-tenant organization users. SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, as mentioned before. Power BI is currently in preview, Power Apps and Dynamics, but with some restricted functionality. And not supported currently are Microsoft 365 Admin Center, Access, Microsoft Forms, OneNote, Planner, Purview, and Intune. Perhaps they will come at a later date. Then to the features you will get from Viva Engage are support for announcements and communications directly into multiple tenants, storyline and leadership posts via the hub tenant. This means the owner tenant. You can share leadership announcements and storylines directly across tenants. You can then choose or to which tenants you want to share these announcements to inside Viva Engage. And you also get insights, analytics on network and conversations in Viva Engage throughout multiple tenants. You will get multi-tenant organization campaigns, ask me anything, and event features. There are some requirements for Viva Engage to work, like native mode networks. I think that should be by default by now. Full trust between all tenants and all users. That's some caveat. All users need a Viva Suite or communications and communities license. So it's not included. Let's say you have Microsoft 365 E3, then it's not included for multi-tenant organization in Viva Engage. You would need to buy additional licenses, at least the communications and communities license. Storyline needs to be enabled on the hub tenant, and storyline leadership corner campaigns and communities are currently available for cross-tenant engagement in an MTO, and only these features, all other features from Viva Engage will be added soon, whenever soon will be. Viva Engage, after doing the multi-tenant organization configuration, Viva Engage needs to be configured, dedicated, or needs to be enabled separately on top of the multi-tenant organization configuration. This looks then like, if you go into Viva Engage in the storyline, you will then have a tenant tag. So you will see from which tenant this announcement comes from. So you see that you have a multi-tenant organization directly inside Viva Engage. Same in here. If you do this conversation part from Viva Engage, you also have the tenant tag. So for users or announcements or posts from your own tenant, you don't have a tag, but from another tenant, you will see from the source tenant in this label. Then for Teams and SharePoint Online, you will unlock the B2B members equals internal users. As mentioned before, you cannot use B2B guests. You will need to change them, or by default, new users will be created as B2B members in the destination tenant. These are threaded as internal users. You will go directly through the meeting lobbies. You will get the co-pilot access. That was the last change, I think, the newest change regarding MTO in Teams, which should be rolled out by now. Then B2B guests will be matched to B2B members by default, and this also means you don't have to switch any more tenants for chats, especially for chats, because the guest part will go away. And SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, share files either via People Picker. Yes, that's also possible for B2B guests, I know, but you can also share files using organization link if the user type equals to member. And we can see this here before multi-tenant configuration. It looked like this. I'm logged in as in the Change Cockpit demo tenant, and I see two individual chats. One is to the guest user, the B2B guest user inside Change Cockpit Lab tenant, because we did a regular B2B invitation before we did the multi-tenant configuration. And the other one is just the regular external chat. And after the configuration of B2B of multi-tenant organization, we see here the chat changed. The external or the guest tag went away because it's now an internal member user, and we also see the profile picture now in the people card and inside the chat. So for a regular user who doesn't click on the card and checks the email address of this user, it is Christy Klein, just looks like an internal user, but this user is from another tenant. So that's because we didn't merge them. No, we glued them together using the multi-tenant organization configuration. So that's just great, but they still reside in two particular tenants. For multi-tenant organization, we also have some requirements. First of all, we need Entra ID P1 at least per user, but only one Entra ID P1 license is required per employee in a multi-tenant org, so you don't need to license this user in both tenants, wouldn't make any sense, but you need at least one Entra ID P1 license per tenant. That's to unlock the features. As soon as you have one license, P1 license in a Entra ID P1 license in the tenant, then the tenant will be stepped up from the feature side to P1 features, and that's needed for cross-tenant synchronization and multi-tenant organization. Then you need at least security administrator or privileged role administrator to consent for the permissions. As mentioned before, maximum of 100 tenants per multi-tenant organizations are supported, so one owner tenant and up to 99 member tenants. Tenants which are in a GDAP relationship, that's granular delegated admin privileges, which can or sometimes will be used by Microsoft partners to manage customer tenants. If you are in such a relationship, then you cannot create or join a multi-tenant organization. You need to dissolve or remove the GDAP relationship first. And the tenants need to be in the same cloud environments. Multi-tenant org is available in GCC, GCC High, DoD, and commercial, but you cannot link together the tenants between different cloud environments. So you cannot do a commercial tenant and do a multi-tenant organization configuration with a GCC tenant, but you can do a multi-tenant organization between different GCC tenants as an example. Then I think we should be ready now for a demonstration. We heard a lot of what it is, what it unlocks, but I think you would like to see how we configure a multi-tenant organization. So first we will now do in the demonstration, we will configure multi-tenant organization. First we will configure the owner. Then we will do the invitation or redeem the invitation which was created from the owner in the member tenant. Then after the multi-tenant organization is set up, we need to set up the synchronization of users. So we need to define which users are being synchronized to the other tenants. This will be by default a full mesh, but in this example, we only have 2 tenants, so it's not a mesh by default or by design. Then we will review the created configuration. So you see what kind of configuration was done by the multi-tenant organization wizard. And then we will just check out the experience in Teams chat again. So for this demonstration, we have 2 tenants. We have the owner tenant, which is changecockpitlab.microsoft.com, and we will have 1 member tenant from M365X and some numbers. So that's a demonstration tenant from Microsoft, which was created with some example users. Perhaps you recognize some users from these tenants. We will then share our users in multi-tenant scope. We will synchronize these 3 users down to the member tenant, then we will synchronize these 2 users up to the owner tenant, and so they will see each other. So let's go to it. First of all, let's do the owner tenant configuration. We are now inside Change Cockpit Lab M365 Admin Center. We go to org settings, security and privacy, then organization profile. We will switch multi-tenant collaboration. Click on Get Started, create a new multi-tenant organization. Click on Next. Organization name, let's call it CC Lab org. And we need to add a tenant ID. We need to add a GUID of the destination tenant. It will then resolve to the tenant name. So you need the GUID of all your tenants to do this. We will allow users to sync into this tenant and suppress consent prompts. These are B2B settings. Next, then create multi-tenant organization. And now we will get the invitation part, copy instructions to clipboard. We will get the invitation part to share with the admin of the other tenant. Now we already see 2 tenants, and this is the part which was copied for the invitation. We will now send over this information to the destination tenant admin of Contoso. We see Change Cockpit is active, Contoso is pending. So next, that's it for the owner tenant for now, because now the next step needs to be done in the first member tenant, which is pending. We will now switch over to Contoso. Here we are in the Contoso M365 Admin Center. Contoso Admin, we see here Contoso in the banner. So we are in the other tenant. We got the invitation by Change Cockpit Lab Admin. We need all this information now. Let's go to settings, org settings, organization profile, multi-tenant collaboration, get started. And now we join an existing multi-tenant organization. We paste the owner's tenant ID. It will resolve to Change Cockpit. We also check allow users and suppress consent prompts. And now it will join this multi-tenant organization to the owner tenant. Your tenant is being added. This can take some time. I think I wait 2 or 3 cloud minutes. This equals to 2 or 3 hours. So after this is done, this takes some time. You can then check back, and afterwards you will see in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center in both tenants that the membership status switches to active. Outbound sync status is still on not applicable or not configured, because that's the next step. We did now the multi-tenant collaboration configuration, MTO config basic setup, but we didn't sync any users yet. So basically it somehow could work, but we need to synchronize users. So for this, we go back to the owner tenant. We start there. We could also start in the member, doesn't matter. We go to share users and we use the simplified sync. You can also use customized synchronization and add groups and so on. And then the members of these groups will be synced out, but you can also change this later. But for the basic configuration, let's choose at least one user. We take now 3 from the owner to the member tenant. Click on save. Yes, we would like to save this. We validate the credentials. Now it will also tell us that your users are being shared with Contoso. Outbound sync status. Now go back to the Contoso tenant, do the same thing, but for Contoso users, org settings, organization profile, multi-tenant collaboration. Click on share users. Now we will choose 2 users from this tenant. Select users for simplified sync. I recommend doing simplified sync because all the basic setup of the synchronization engine for the cross-tenant synchronization will be done by multi-tenant collaboration wizard, and then you can change it afterwards from Enter ID portal. That's fully supported. Now it will tell me your users are being shared with Change Cockpit. Here we are. Okay. Now let's wait. It will now do the synchronization first time for us. It will be done afterwards regularly. And we see now Contoso is active and outbound sync state is set to enabled. Same thing here. Okay, it's both enabled, so this means that Change Cockpit users are being synced to Contoso, and Contoso users too will be synced to Change Cockpit. Actually, that's it for the base setup. Multi-tenant collaboration, multi-tenant organization is set up, B2B settings are done, B2B synchronization is done, and all new users are being created as B2B members in the destination or in the other tenant. Existing B2B collaboration guest users, you have 2 options. Either you change it manually, or you do a configuration change in the synchronization part. I will show you later where, and then you can override all guest to member users, and they won't be deleted and freshly synced. They will be converted, and therefore if they are already member of some teams, they will keep this access. Everything stays in place. They only get some upgrades because they are now members and not guests anymore. So let's go back to Enter ID and Teams. We have the regular B2B guest and the external chat after our regular Teams invitation. So the regular Teams invitation created the B2B guest user. That's why we see in the chat on my Change Cockpit tenant, we see that this with the guest remark, Christy Klein with guest remark, and in Entra ID, we see a regular Christy Klein guest user. We see it's an invitation creation type user. That's for all guests. That's normal. And we see identities external Azure AD and the user type equals to guest. So it's an external guest user. Now, after the MTO configuration and after we upgraded this user to member, so we did MTO and we did the synchronization, the guest remark vanished, and we also see the image of this person in the people card. This image only works from Teams currently because it's a Teams service where people search will find this image. The profile picture will not be synchronized between tenants, but Teams can get through the MTO configuration, can get the image out of the other tenant. So we have back into Enter ID users, we now see Christy Klein. We don't see the profile image in here, as just mentioned. It's a Teams feature currently only, but we see it changed now to member. We also synchronized the other user, Alan, from the Contoso tenant to Change Cockpit tenant. That's why this user is now also here as external Azure AD, creation type, invitation, and member. But this Alan de Jong was by default created as a member user. And because we invited Christy before we did the MTO configuration, it was a guest user, and I manually changed this user from guest to member. So it's now a member user. MTO also configured the cross-tenant access settings. I think you already know some stuff about cross-tenant access settings because this was also used for the shared channels part. But anyway, if you go to Enter ID, external identities for your tenant, then you see organizational settings in cross-tenant access settings. And I didn't have any configuration in here. It was all by default. And now MTO Wizard created the configuration for Contoso and also checked the checkbox for allow users synchronize into this tenant. That's one part. This was done in both tenants. So also Contoso tenant has the configuration in cross-tenant access settings for Change Cockpit. So this is being done, but I only show one side because it's the same on the other side. Then the cross-tenant synchronization part, let's have a look at this. Let's go to portal in Change Cockpit tenant. Then go to cross-tenant synchronization in Enter ID configurations. Now we see the MTO underline sync configuration. This is done by the MTO wizard. And we see here 3 users were synchronized, 100% complete. We could view the provisioning logs. Let's go to users and groups. Here we see all the 3 users. If you would like to add more users, you can also do it from here or add a security group containing users you would like to sync. We have the admin credentials. We don't have a password. This is everything done in the back end. And then we see the provisioning scope. And in here, we see all the attribute mapping. So all these attributes are synchronized now from Change Cockpit tenant to the Contoso tenant. We see we could remove many of these attributes if you would like to do so, except for the mandatory attributes, where the delete button is grayed out. So the last edition, I think that was back January 2024, already a year, was the manager attribute, which is also being synchronized in an MTO configuration. Now we also see the rules of the member type, as mentioned before, by default. If the cross-tenant synchronization creates a new guest in the destination tenant, the user type will be member and not guest. But this mapping will only be applied during object creation. And if you would like to upgrade all existing B2B guests, then just either do this manually in the destination tenant, or you only need to do this once, or you apply this mapping to always, and then all your B2B guests will be upgraded to B2B or changed to B2B members. So it's configurable as you desire. It's also fully supported to change this afterwards, even when created using the MTO wizard. Then we have some multi-tenant org settings or some things to consider I would like add here. First of all, you can add tenant labels. As shown before, this Christie now looks like it's an internal user inside your tenant, no matter that it's technically an external user synchronized into your tenant. If you would like to change this, then you can create labels to either to all tenants, the same label, the multi-tenant org name, or you can also create individual labels for the individual tenants, like for Change Cockpit, just change it to Change Cockpit and Contoso, and then these labels will be applied to the username, so it's more distinguishable on from which tenant the particular user resides or in which tenant. You can change, as mentioned, the attribute mapping as you wish. You can change the member and guest attribute. That's very important, and I mentioned it now many times, but it's very, very crucial that the final guest user is a member and not a guest. Sorry, the final B2B user is a member and not a guest anymore. Then MTO can also configure the free busy sharing in Exchange Online during organizational relationships. So afterwards, your Outlook users will see all the synchronized users from the other tenant in the global address list and can also view the free busy state of these users using the very long known organizational relationship or federation trust from between Exchange Online tenants. If you have existing contacts, let's say you acquired this company a long time ago and you already set up for the case of free busy sharing, you already set up the contact synchronization with a third-party tool or using scripts between the tenants. And if you now synchronize the B2B users as members into the tenant, then they will be shown next to the contact. So you will have duplicates inside your global address list, which would make any sense. So it's recommended to remove existing contacts and just be careful if you remove the contacts, check if they are already member of distribution groups. And then you would also need to add the B2B member users to these distribution groups before you remove the respective contacts, just as a side note. Then old chats aren't merged when this user is converted from a guest to a member, but the user still sees this chat thread with B2B members. But if you try to write a new message in the B2B member chat, then this thread is blocked and you will be redirected to the right chat with the B2B member user. MTO users can create teams and invite guests from other tenants. So this Christie is now a B2B member. If Christie accesses the tenant of Change Cockpit, then it's a member user. So she has the same rights as a normal internal user and therefore is able to invite guests if that's enabled in the tenant for members. And so this user from another tenant can then invite users from a third tenant as an example. Then the profile picture, as mentioned, is visible for multi-tenant organization users in Teams and only Teams, but not yet in other clients because it's a Teams feature which does the lookup in the back end. And Teams and conference room booking between tenants, across tenants, is not yet supported in multi-tenant organization. Exchange Online isn't ready yet anywhere for multi-tenant except for the global address list and FreeBSD using the federation. But also, let's say you would like to grant permission for a multi-tenant user to a shared mailbox, that doesn't work yet. So that's it for multi-tenant, for the collaboration part, Teams, SharePoint, and so on. Then I have a separate topic. It's kind of separate because you can also configure this absolutely individually between the multi-tenant org configuration wizard. You can have it in conjunction if you would like so, but you don't need to. That's why I split it as a separate topic inside this presentation. That's Defender portal, security portal, and multi-tenant. So let's assume you are an administrator who manages multiple security portals in different tenants. Then you can now, or since a year, you can have this as a multi-tenant organization security portal, and then you will see all incidents and alerts from all your tenants you manage in one unified portal. First of all, for this portal, you need permissions to all tenants for your admin users. So let's say you are the admin at this Contoso tenant, then you will need security permissions to the security portal in Contoso, but you also need permission for the same user in the Change Cockpit tenant. You can either do this using GDAP, so this means if you use granular delegated admin privileges for partners, then you cannot do MTO, so it's either or. But if you want to do, if you are not using GDAP, the easiest way anyway, and I will show this now then in the demo, is using Entra B2B authentication. So you invite the admin user from the other tenant into your tenant as B2B guest, grant security portal access, and then you can do it from the other side, from the effective user. You can then create the MTO configuration in the Defender portal. I will show you. And here's the Defender portal using 4 tenants or adding 4 tenants, but we'll do it now then with 2 tenants. First of all, the capabilities you will get using Defender or security portal in multi-tenant orgs. First one is you will get incidents and alerts, unified view, the alerts, advanced hunting. You can do an advanced hunting KQL query through all tenants you manage. Custom detection rules, that's quite an important part for now because you can also deploy this detection rule to a tenant group. Then tenants, devices, you will see all devices from all different tenants, including the vulnerability management and configuration settings. So you have all relevant parts for your daily business from all tenants in one unified portal. The content distribution part currently, which is configurable in the MTO portal, which you can use to deploy custom detection rules to a tenant group. So if you have configured a custom detection rule and let's say we have a new 0 day out there, we need to do this, then we can just go in there, create a tenant group and assign this custom detection rule to all tenants, and job done. You don't have to do it 4 times, 1 time is enough. Then for the demonstration, we will now invite administration from Contoso as a B2B guest to the Change Cockpit Lab tenant. We will grant to this guest user, B2B guest user, we will grant permission to access the security portal. Actually, we will grant global admin permission just for demonstration purpose. Don't do this in production if not needed. Then we will go to mto.security.microsoft.com. Yes, that's it. If you need MTO for the security portal, just add mto dot before the security.microsoft.com and you will just be redirected into the MTO portal. We will do this from the Contoso side, so logged in as the Contoso user, which now has access to the Change Cockpit tenant because we did the B2B guest invitation. And from there, we will set up the MTO because this guest user sees now both tenants, because this user has now access to both tenants, one as the real user and one as a guest user. And then we will manage Contoso and Change Cockpit Lab from this Unified Defender portal. So let's have a look at this. First of all, we start in the Change Cockpit Lab tenant. We will go to new user, invite external user, and paste the admin address in here. We will do the invitation, click on invite. It will do the B2B guest invitation. This doesn't have to be redeemed because we have the MTO configuration done before. If you don't have the MTO cross-tenant access settings, then you need to redeem this guest invitation as you are used to anyway. Now we will see this admin user in Enter ID, the guest user. Let's go to assigned roles, click on add assignments, choose now for the sake of this demonstration, global admin. And now we have global admin rights assigned to this B2B guest user from the Contoso tenant. Therefore, switch back to Contoso. We now have this guest user. Let's check it. First, let's go to Outlook for this admin user. Yes, it has this user has license. We see we got the email. You have been added to Change Cockpit organization, so this looks fine. There is no action required. As mentioned before, now let's go to the My Account panel for this admin and check for organizations. And we will see, yes, we are now member of Contoso signed in and Change Cockpit Lab tenant as guest. Let's go to the mto.security portal. Click now on settings, add tenants. We will select both tenants. It sees, as mentioned before, both tenants. That's it. MTO portal, go back to home. And now we will see all assets where we have access to for both tenants at the same time. If we go to incidents and alerts, to incidents, yes, we don't have any incidents in this demo environment, but the important thing to see in here is the tenant name column. So you see then from which tenant this incident, or from the tenant where this incident comes from, and you can even filter or sort for this tenant name. But you will see all incidents and alerts for our all selected tenants. That's it. It's quite easy. As soon as you are invited as guest, or if you already did the MTO setup, then you could put your admins into synchronization scope. Yes, then they will be as B2B members and not B2B guests. But anyway, then grant permissions to these users. Go back to this mto.security.microsoft.com portal, set up the configuration. That's it. So the configuration actually isn't a tenant configuration. It's more our user configuration where we couple together the tenants into this MTO portal. It wouldn't be a Change Cockpit deep dive if we don't have any roadmap, but actually it was quite hard to find more features on the roadmap regarding multi-tenant org. MTO Defender, we will get additional content types for these multi-tenant distributions, and not just, as mentioned before, the custom detection rules. We will get additional types where we can pull, let's say, policies, or we can push policies out to all managed tenants. That would be a very great scenario. And then we will get multi-tenant organization notifications for admins. That's currently in private preview. Therefore, it will be hopefully this year sometimes in public preview. So you will get the notifications as admins from all orgs you manage. And the last roadmap entry regarding the collaboration multi-tenant org was actually from January 2024, so a year ago. I hope there will be soon some more new features. Personally, I'm waiting for better integration regarding Exchange Online, especially for shared mailboxes, calendar write access, and not only free busy access, because if we could use this, then this is the biggest pain point for mergers and acquisitions. Then perhaps we can we don't have to do so many tenant-to-tenant migrations anymore. We will see, because that's always the first needed step. We need to work together in Exchange Online, and therefore I hope for better integration in regarding this service. Then we are already on the out report. The next events are on Wednesday, January 22nd, we have the change cockpit in Swiss German in the morning, 9:30 till 11:30. Then from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, the English change cockpit. And on 4th of March, yes, the February change cockpit is in between, but the 4th of March, we will have the next planned deep dive regarding SharePoint Online Advanced Management, as and all times are in Central European time zone, so Switzerland time. And we had already the deep dives. If you missed them, the recordings are in the Teams, in the Change Cockpit Teams for you to watch in there. We had the deep dive about backup archive in M365, all around email security, then get in loop, everything about loop workspaces and so on. MFA and phishing resistant was the last one, beginning of, or almost in the middle of December. And now this one all about multi-tenant, as mentioned before. The next one will be SharePoint on Advanced Management. As mentioned, all recordings are in Teams of Change Cockpit. If you can't find it, then you need to switch the tenant to Change Cockpit and go to the Change Cockpit Teams, or come and ask me if you can't find it. And then we also have other resources like msp365.blog, where we publish some information, and we also have some Easy Tuesday podcasts. Yes, we will plan some updates in here this year. If you have any questions, please come and ask. And yeah, I ask you to add me on LinkedIn if you didn't do so, or my MVP colleague. The reason for this, that my MVP colleague is also listed here, that's because the Swiss German Change Cockpit is held live and currently, and therefore he is the moderator in there. So anyway, thank you for watching this. I hope you got an idea about multi-tenant org, and I would say see you in the next deep dive, or even in the Change Cockpit. Thanks and goodbye.